Welcome to the Casting Forward podcast, brought to you by Clubmate, the all-in-one management platform for clubs and fisheries. We'll be talking all things fish and fishing with new guests every episode from the world of angling, from fishery managers to some of the best anglers in the country, finding out what they're up to, advice for your fishery and thoughts on the future of the sport. So let's get started. So welcome everybody to our latest seminar on tackling invasive species and predation. It's really nice that you've all joined. We're very fortunate tonight to be joined by some guests from both the Angling Trust and the Institute of Fisheries Management, in the shape of Jake Davoile from the Angling Trust Fishery Management Advisor and Ian Wellby from Institute of Fisheries Management. So thank you very much for joining us. Invasive species and predation are obviously very challenging things across fisheries, so it's something we're quite glad to talk about, and we really want to help Clubmate to kind of put the clubs and fisheries in touch with the people that can hopefully give you some answers and help you to find some of the solutions. We're going to have a short presentation first from Ian at the Institute of Fisheries Management.
Cool, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Welcome. Fantastic to see so many people interested in this subject area. A quick introduction to myself. My name is Ian Wellby, work for the Institute of Fisheries Management. Some of what I'm going to say is maybe a bit left field, but just to put some in background, I've been involved in fisheries management for 38 years now. And in all that time, the most contentious issue we ever talk about is predators. It's not a new thing, by far away not a new thing. I'm quite geeky about this sort of thing, and I've got lots of books going back to the 1800s, and they all talk about predators. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, really, I want to have you think about things. So things to think about. We often hear about predators. We do all the time. But some invasives can be predators as well. And those are the ones I want to concentrate about, simply because I think we all need to talk about this in a much less heated, much more sensible manner. I think most people involved are after the same thing, which is healthy fish in healthy environments, with a natural selection of predators and a natural selection of prey, and all of everything's good in the world. I know it's a bit utopian. So not all predators are the same, and I'm going to cover a couple of the important ones from this thing. Here's the first one. Know and love him. Here's one I caught. I must admit, I caught him on the River Trent, quite close to Newark. Must admit, I cheated. If you look in the background, there's the trailer with the boat and the electrofishing gear on it. Fantastic predator, fabulous creature, one of the most amazing creatures you'll ever see. But it is invasive, and it is a predator. Lots of people say it's been around for a while. Well, it has. It's been in the country since the 1880s, but very restricted. It was introduced into the Woburn Abbey, and stayed there for a long time without spread at all. No spread. And actually introduced into the wild legally in the 1960s to control roach populations in the cut-off channel. Since then, it's become very widespread. One of the things I want you to think about is why it's become widespread. It's one of those creatures that personally I'm quite ambivalent about. It seems to fit into quite nicely, but it's pretty big populations in some places, and certainly on the canals it does cause problems. There's no point in denying it. There's no point in pretending otherwise. And it's the first of the ones to have a think about. Next one is much more contentious. So this picture is the current British record. I think it's 143 pounds. And then that's a similar sized moggy, and they're pretty widespread. So starting again, another one that was introduced in the 1800s into Woburn Abbey. fantastic story if you ever get a chance to read it, about how they were brought over in the 1800s on trains and boats, plane. You know, it was quite a mission, 7 or 8 days to get them here, but very restricted in those days. Never ever legally introduced into a new water, and it's become quite widespread, as those two pictures indicate. They're pretty much in every county throughout the UK. Certainly in some of the rivers, certainly into the wild. Why should we worry about this? Why worry? Well, they do get rather big. That's a River Po monster. So the first one shows them queuing up on the river by a beach where the pigeons come to drink, and they've learned to predate on pigeons as they come to drink, largely because they've stripped the river of quite a lot of else. So they're forced into unusual behaviors to take food. They really have quite a dramatic impact on some of the places they've been introduced to over the years, the River Po and the Ebro being particularly good examples. But we've had them here for a long time and don't seem to be causing any problems. You know, they're about in the rivers, they're about in the lakes, but very low numbers. But recently, they've started doing this, actively breeding, actively producing a lot of offspring. And this is a picture from a lake fishery where they've had catfish for a while. And that's from a netting. And you can imagine catfish pretty difficult to catch in a seine net. That suggests they're eagerly breeding and successfully breeding. Climate change may find that they have become a really big problem. Quite a lot of catfish waters are now trying to get rid of them because they just are overtaking, can't fish for anything else, and they're starting to eat and damage the big carp. So you can see that some things change how we perceive them, and life will change dramatically in the next 20, 30 years, and what we perceive as particularly problematic or problematic in these sorts of things, particularly in invasive non-natives. And also we have unexpected predators. We think of predators like the first picture of the zander with the big teeth. These are predations and eggs. From an ecologist point of view, that can be more damaging to a population than the taking of old or older fish. Mature fish, as with all animals, they're not immortal. Something will eat them. They generally don't die of old age. Something comes along and eat them. So taking the older fish is taking the older fish out of the population, but eating the eggs can be a problem. So these are the two biggies for this one, signal crayfish, and this one is a motherless minnow. I'm assuming most of you have seen signal crayfish, hoping very few of us have seen motherless minnows. But these are both invasive non-natives. And the motherless minnow is becoming more invasive, was restricted to certain parts of Somerset Levels, but now it's spread quite dramatically from there. You find it in Shropshire Union Canal and various places up in Macclesfield Way. So what am I talking about? Well, it's true that most of these invasives are going to new waters. How are they getting to new waters? Well, most of them by humans. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is us, anglers. The spread of zander is pretty much all angling. We know, and it's self-evident, tackling them once in the water or once in a geographic area is very difficult. Removing any fish from an environment is really, really difficult. Look at the agency and the way they're dealing with topmouth gudgeon, very difficult. So my view is we absolutely need to prevent more spread of these. If we can assume they are where they are, then at least we ought to reduce the spread. And that's my big point of the evening, is how do we educate people on the possible impacts and the problems caused by these creatures to make it less likely that anglers are going to move them? Because we have to face that fact. We have to face the fact that the vast majority, certainly of zander and catfish, absolutely, is angler mediated. People are moving them by themselves. That's what we want. Not homogenized. Everything's the same. Everything full of carp, catfish, and zander, but a wide variety of natural habitats that we can go and fish in our own particular style, our own particular way, and we can all enjoy the natural environment as it should be, not as we've made it. And that's the bit that I want you to think about: is we're homogenizing our particularly still waters, but certainly catfish into rivers is a problem. There he goes. Look, what a beautiful creature. We've got to love a pike. It was my pet for a good long while, and that's me.
You don't see many at that size.
No, indeed.
Thank you very much, Ian. I mean, the interesting part about that conversation is that predation isn't always as simple as we think it is, and it affects different people in different areas of the country. Zander are a very interesting one because a lot of the kind of more southern rivers see very large, very few specimen zander, and think, why would anyone want to reduce the zander population? You know, they're a celebrated fish. One of the key advantages of Clubmate is that we see a lot of fisheries from the top to bottom of the country. So if you visit the canal network, and I did visit one recently, where we netted a nearby lake that had an inlet from the canal, and it was absolutely loused with baby zander. Now, when you've got hundreds and hundreds and thousands of, you know, single 1 pound zander that are predating on everything and all the fry and all the food, it becomes a very big challenge, and it's actually having a very negative impact on wider fish populations. Now, in that area, these zander need to be managed in some way. There is a stigma all round. This creates challenges between, you know, predator anglers, lure fishermen, manufacturers, angling clubs. Clubs can't sustain overwhelming predation from any species, whether that's zander or catfish or cormorants or otters or any of them. So it's really important to see it as an open-ended problem. We've all got our own predators, but we will all make progress if we understand other people's predators as well and other people's environments. And we all, hand in hand as anglers, try and work out national solutions to local problems. Because if we all try and solve our one local issue with the predator that's the most important to us, we're going to struggle to make a lot of progress. So I hope that kind of comes through in Ian's kind of messaging, that we need kind of more responsible views of invasive species and predation, rather than just being worried about essentially tackling one species at a time. Questions towards the end. We'll open this up to a Q&A, and Ian's quite happy to answer any questions you might have. But thank you very much for the first presentation, Ian. I'm going to stop presenting now, and we're going to hand over to Jake Davoile from the Angling Trust, Fisheries Management Advisor, very skilled man who spends most of his life chasing otters inside otter fences.
Right, good evening, everyone. Yeah, thanks for having me. So this handsome young devil is me. So my name's Jake. I work for the Angling Trust, along with my colleague Richard, who I think is on the call tonight. So we're the two fishery management advisors that help fisheries with the impacts of predation. So I cover sort of everything sort of south of Coventry, and Richard covers everything sort of north of Coventry. The two species that I'll talk about this evening, one's it's going to be cormorants and then otters briefly. So I suppose we'll start with these guys, cormorants. So the great cormorant, Phallococarex carbo. There are two subspecies, and I think the first thing that I'd like to get across is that this isn't something that you know can be sort of remedied very easily. We have a native coastal bird that breeds on the coast, but also inland, normally on sort of islands and up in trees. But we've also got the sinensis bird as well, which is another subspecies. So that's a European bird that migrates across from the Baltic every winter. Now, some of those birds stay and breed, so we've got a sort of mixed sort of population. So every winter we get 30,000 birds coming across from Northern Europe during the winter just to overwinter here and feed. Some remain, and then the vast majority will head back. So what we can get then sort of towards the winter time are huge numbers of birds coming across. So this is going back a few years, but this is Dungeness. So this is a large reserve down in the south east of the country. So what will happen is these birds will come across, form large colonies, and come together to roost at night, but then will then migrate outwards and then go and feed on fisheries that are which have a higher stocking density. So as I said, in this country, they breed up in trees, so there's very little that could be really done about that. As soon as they do start to nest build, then they're obviously protected then, so nothing can be done to scare them. In some of the European countries, they breed on the floor, on nests on the ground. So I suppose one of the biggest sort of conflicts with fisheries is that they're eating fish, and they'll take fish. We've seen them have fish of up to sort of 4 pounds in weight, but on average, a cormorant will consume just over 1 pound of fish per day, spread out over its life. I think one of the biggest issues, though, is what I see with fisheries is the impacts of the stress that is placed upon fish when they're hunting, particularly when they gather up in numbers and then start to push fish around. So these fish here have all died, whether or not that's just through stress. You can see all of the sort of striations on the side of their bodies. So you often get a lot of fish in distress. So the fishing will switch off. People will say there's no fish in here, they're not catching, but you'll still see cormorants there. So I think what's going on is that the fish have switched off from feeding. They're totally in stress, in hiding. And then we'll probably venture out as night falls. I suppose going back to what Ian was saying, which is spot on, which is what we want is nice, healthy fishery with lots of habitat, good water quality, and happy fish. So all of these lovely areas are superb for fish to get in, to escape predators. And like this fishery here, you've got obviously lovely lilies. Offering shade and sanctuary for the fish and overgrown trees. But what will happen is that the cormorants will still feed. So the fish will dive into those areas and group up, but the cormorants will still feed. So even though this isn't obviously ideal habitat there with filamentous algae and stuff, this cormorant, I watched this and it was diving through tunnels and coming up with all these little tench. So alongside that, I suppose one of the key ones I'd like to sort of take home messages today is about looking to utilize natural habitat and then prevent the cormorants from following them in there. So there's lots that can be done. This is chestnut paling over a reed bed, and I was watching this cormorant working along the outside, but the fish have managed to actually go through those gaps, which are sort of 3 or 4 inches. So even decent sized sort of skimmers can go through that and roach, but then the cormorant can't get to them, so they're actually protected. So it's just this stuff, chestnut paling, you get it in bundles, real nice, and it looks nice and natural, and you can bend it and you can bring it around sort of bushes and things like that. So all of these ones as well, I will touch on funding, but all of this stuff has been funded through the Angling Improvement Fund as well. So nice areas where fish can get in and out away from predation. This is another one to touch on. So you'll see a lot of sort of stillwater fisheries, probably up to this size, is quite a large one, which will be using ropes to actually exclude cormorants from. This is one down at the top of the Colne Valley, but it's not particularly pleasing on the eye, I wouldn't say. And yeah, so they're doing what they can. There's a cormorant flight path that comes through, and they were, pulling their hair out really. Cormorants dropping in throughout the day, so they did what they could. So then, following a funding bid, have then sort of upgraded that, and have now got this high wire system, which stops the birds getting into their silverfish waters. Not ideal, but in this case, it was the only thing they could do. So it's a much neater, much tidier project that was funded. Stock management. So a lot of proactive clubs and fisheries now have their own stock ponds, so they can bring the fish in at a lower cost, protect them from otters and cormorants and other fish-eating birds, but then grow them on. So then they're cormorant-proof size, whether that's sort of 2-3 pounds, as best they can, and then stock them in. So saving money and protecting their fish. A similar one here up in Nottingham. It was a real nice one. Just to quickly touch on roosting birds. So if you've got a fishery where you've got an island and you've got roosting cormorants on there, there's a real nice technique. You can use lasers on those to move them on. And they don't habituate to that technique. So you can do that as they come into roost, is to move them on. So they're not then at first like dropping straight into your water to then feed on your fish. So there's a variety of companies that do them. This is probably the easiest one to use, the Portec one handheld, great bit of kit. And we funded a number of fisheries with roosting birds on their site to do that. So yes, pretty sort of, sci-fi cool stuff. But so this is a short video of a roosting site up near me. And you'll see the laser appear on the left-hand side. So you just scan it. So it's target selective, so you're not scaring any of the overwintering ducks on the water. You move it through where you know the cormorants are, and the cormorants are just about to, you'll see them drop out of the trees. They hate it.
There they go.
And you'll see them come out and move off. Now, what they will do is circle, and they'll come and land again. So it's, the art of repetition is required on this one. But after 5 or 6 sort of goes on this particular island, they go elsewhere. So they're going somewhere else where there might not be a fishing interest on there. And then very quickly, they actually recognize me as I'd go down. So as soon as you'd even walk over the brow of the hill to walk down there, they'd be up and off. So over the course of a winter, a couple of times a week, the numbers had gone from, 130, 140 birds down to just a handful of stubborn cormorants. So this is a roosting site. This is using the thermal imaging, which we use and to count the birds, so you can get an accurate number of birds within that area, for whether that's for licensing purposes or for funding application. There's a nice little tool. So this is the 8mm starter pistol. So this is brilliant. Great little bit of kit. If you haven't got a shotgun certificate, it's a bit of an easier tool to carry. It can be in your, the fishery bailiff bag. But extremely loud. You need ear defenders with this one. But yeah, works a treat. 2 shots. It's mimicking a shotgun. Whether or not you've got a license on that itself, or they're being shot under license elsewhere locally.
Is that for the birds or the anglers, Jake?
That's for both. Yeah, that's for yeah.
Based off the angle.
But certainly, I wouldn't recommend having it in your pocket and then accidentally getting it out when you're paying for your petrol or something like that, because it's not going to end well. So there is an option for a fishery to obtain a license for lethal control. That's there to enhance scaring. So it's not there to reduce a population. So if you've got landowner's consent and a shotgun certificate, you can start by shooting to scare, whether or not that's with a shotgun or with a starter pistol. And you can document that in a simple scaring log or in a diary. And that is really, alongside some other sort of bits of information, this is the key evidence that you need then to obtain a license from Natural England. So that could be on an individual basis. So you could cover 3 sites on an individual license, or you could coordinate that and work together with other fisheries in the area under an area license. So that would then be sort of mapped and targeting the cormorants where possible, and then potentially moving off their roosting sites. A lot of people are put off by applying for a license. The forms, I think it's about 11 pages, but it's not that bad. And if anyone needs any help with that, then we're here to assist with that. And off the back of that, then some clubs now on their website will have a sort of place to log sightings, which is brilliant, and that can all go into a spreadsheet, and then you've got the anglers then obtaining that information for you, so you can then just print that off, and then you've got that evidence then to take to Natural England. It also would then highlight, say, certain waters where people are seeing more birds, so to target that. That's the time to spend the time and the money on those fisheries. And then alongside shooting, they can work. You could put these out and they might work for a week or 2. But if you are shooting to scare and you are shooting lifelike mannequins, these spinning sort of hunters, they can work really well. But you need to shoot alongside those to reinforce the scaring element to it. So a small hide sort of out the way, and then getting in when the birds come in to actually feed. So if you're getting there and the birds have already fed, they'll struggle to take off because they've already got a belly full. So getting in early mornings. Right, that's cormorants briefly covered. I've missed quite a lot, but I haven't got too long to carry on. So the next creature we'll touch on is the Eurasian otter. This is in the mustelid family, so along with sort of stoats, weasels, and badgers. And this has made a pretty significant comeback since it was almost extinct across the UK, going back to sort of the late 70s. And with the banning of hunting and the banning of certain pesticides, otters have made an amazing sort of recovery, really, alongside with a bit of a kickstart in certain areas where there were releases in the Upper Thames Valley and across in East Anglia, and in Yorkshire as well, I believe. So regardless of whether that's right or wrong of the releases, I think we all know that otters are sort of here to stay, and now pick up signs of otters all across the country. I believe in every county. I know sort of maybe Sussex, not as many, but yeah, we're picking them up. So some of the signs you'll see on fisheries and are things like this. So certainly otters can predate on really large carp. I've seen them take sort of fish up to 55 pounds. But yeah, if you're seeing these sorts of things being pulled up on the bank, that's going to be an otter. It's not going to be a mink or something else. But it's key to know that otters eat a variety of different food items. So that can range from small mammals, birds. They absolutely love signal crayfish. So, bizarrely, looking at the sort of balance, there's been a number of fisheries that where otters have got into the fence fishery that have actually been saved by the fact that they've got signal crayfish in there, because the otters, that's just, easy pickings for the otters, and they absolutely love them. So the only the only thing to do on a stillwater fishery would be to fence that to exclude the otters at a cost, and there are grants available to assist fisheries with that. So this is kind of a standard otter fence. It has a skirt and it which is, you can either dig it in, or it has an outward facing skirt at the base to stop the otter from digging under, or other animals like badgers. The aperture of the fence is 50 by 100 mil on a standard otter fence, and that stops the otter from squeezing through the gaps. And then they can also climb, so it has an outward facing overhang on the outside to prevent the otter climbing up and in. So we've yet to have one climb in with this specification. There's a variety of other spec fences. So people use rabbit netting or chicken mesh, which doesn't last as long and is prone to sort of being ragged and opened up, or even electric, which can work, and some people swear by that. Although we've had a number of fisheries where otters have either jumped or just gone straight through the electric that was working. So I think just to finish up, it's just to touch on, so if you have got a fence fishery, and if there was one thing to go and do over the weekend, would be to go and check your fence. So sadly, there's a number of instances that we get called out to where otters are gaining access into fence fisheries. So this is the last one, 100-acre site with an incredible otter fence. But this one was digging under the gravel and trying to gain access onto the inflow stream that went through the site. So you can see here she's having a look and had a dig under. And then the next one, 2 minutes later, picked her up, go in, and you'll see her go straight under, up it goes, and then she's in. This is one of those sites that has, one of the lakes has crayfish in, and thankfully she was on those, but there's humongous fish in here at great value that potentially could have been open to predation. Here's another one that was sneaking in the back of a fence, and that was coming in and leaving without the fishery knowing. So they'd suspected they were finding sort of patches of scales. So after a fencing check, going round and finding that small hole right out the back by a ditch line, putting the cameras on, and this otter was coming and going on a regular basis. This one on an outflow, so a classic area that they'd follow up. They'd come off the main river, follow up the stream onto the outflow, and this one was coming and going, sneaking through basically a splayed wire in the fence, and you can just see the size of that. So you can just about squeeze your hands through that, and the otter's into that one. And then this one, showing their ability to climb. I think just like us, they've all got sort of various skills that they can use, and some of them have learnt to climb vertical, and that one actually jumped through the gap. It's an older style wire where the apertures open up, so it got to the top, and before the overhang, it's squeezing through and jumping in. So just to finish, really, it was just a couple of I was going through some pictures and looking at some of the ways on fisheries that spend to great expense tens of thousands of pounds on fences, and then can make some real simple mistakes where otters can get in. So this is on a gate just to let the anglers put their hands through to open the latch, and that's just a perfect. Basically, if you were to design a little otter entrance, that would be pretty much it. Pipe work. So a lot of fisheries will use the otter wire itself to actually cover up the pipes, but over time these can fracture and break, and the otters will actually work at that to get in. So things like this, where it's all fenced, but all it takes is that one little hole for the otter to get in. And splayed wires, so fences that have just been put up, and then someone's gone with a strimmer, gone through and clipped the base of the thing. So an otter was getting through this gap, this down the Kennet Valley. So it's just simple things to look up for. The base of gates on that left-hand side, another entry point. And this one was fascinating. The fence, to all intents and purposes, was spot on, but they were still getting fresh spraints. And the otter was actually, it had got in, the fence was repaired, and this was living under one of the pegs. And it was staying in there all during the day, curled up in a ball, and then at night, then it would then come out and help itself to a few fish. So this video is brilliant. This will cover what I've sort of been through in a lot more depth. It's about 20 minutes long, and my colleague Richard put this together and narrated it, and this goes through everything you need to know about checking your otter fence and ways otters can get in. Yeah, you might want to head over to our webpage on predation, which has loads of information on all the predators and what can be done, and various links to various papers, and then funding as well. So with regards to predation, there's the Angling Improvement Fund, which is due to go live in April at the moment, but yeah, that may change. So if you're looking at putting together a funding bid for habitat improvements or a fence or non-lethal measures to reduce predation, you can go on there. You can register your interest, get in contact with either myself or Richard, and we can help you with that process. Yeah, and that's about all from me.
This episode of the Casting Forward podcast is brought to you by Clubmate, the all-in-one management platform for clubs and fisheries. Thank you, Jake. That was really interesting. Thank you very much for that one. There are a million topics across hundreds of fisheries we could talk about when it comes to invasive species and predation. So obviously we're just giving you a bit of a taste this evening of some of the really common ones. Otters and cormorants are always a big question. Zander, big question on the canals. Obviously catfish have been raised. I'm sure some of you have got some different species you'd like to talk about, and we are going to open it up for questions soon. I've also got some slides from Natural England, but conscious of the time, I'm going to send it all out to the guests afterwards. Dave Ottewell from Natural England unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but he has provided some slide content for us, so I will send it out to everyone to just have a look through. Gives you a good overview, and Dave has some really interesting points to make about what constitutes non-native, and a lot of this is geographically local and to do with kind of overwhelming environments where we shouldn't be introducing species to an environment just because we like them. Now, I know we're all anglers here and we all like to catch fish, but there's always a temptation to put some fish in because you like to catch them and because you might want a new species. This is one of the reasons for the spread of zander and catfish by anglers, as I'm sure Ian will probably agree. One of the ones that was raised a lot for me locally is barbel. My club has quite a lot of prolific barbel fisheries, but a lot of people, because they're an exciting river fish, the prince of the river and that 3-foot twitch, a lot of fisheries always request, can we have barbel? Now, barbel can be a very deteriorating species on other species such as chub. They tend to habit the same environments, and at spawning time are quite destructive to the spawn, and you will find usually a general decline in chub stocks in areas where barbel become sustainable and prolific. So there are lots of questions around not just the obvious species, but introducing too many of one species or trying to overwhelm certain species. Carp are a massive issue in certain areas. Carp are probably the most destructive species discussed tonight. Carp in non-natural environments are one of the most destructive species possible. Now, when it comes to other species such as the signal crayfish and mitten crabs, one of the suggestions has been, shall we introduce carp to predate on them? Now, if we do that, we're probably going to do more destructive damage to these riverine environments than we've ever done before. So there's a massive balance across fisheries, and just because a predator is a predator for you doesn't mean it is for someone else. For some other people, it's probably sustaining a good ecology in that area, and vice versa. We're going to start going through some chat questions now. So we'll go through the text questions first, and then we'll move on to raising hands and kind of asking some questions of the guests. We're going to go first. Babs, I think you've pinned some, so if you want to read them out, we can then get whoever the relevant guest to kind of answer the question.
Yep. So I've got one here from Phil Holt. Exeter Canal is up to 12 foot deep and 6 miles long, has catfish, and with the help of the EA have tried fluke net. Is it fluke nets?
Fike net.
See if there are any kittens, but they don't get any. Not sure what we can do next.
Ian, it might be one for you to have a chat about as kind of catfish were your topic. What can you do if obviously you're not catching any of these baby cats, these kittens? What can you do to track them down, or what else can they try if they know they're there, but obviously they can't catch them?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to eradicate or you're trying to get rid of the catfish from the canal, then you have to try a variety of techniques. So a bit of electrofishing, a bit of fike netting, quite probably rod and line angling is the best way for a lot of these species, particularly Wells catfish. They don't respond that well. Fike netting is better than netting, but electrofishing again they don't particularly respond that well to it. So you might need to use a variety of methods to eradicate them. But that's sort of my point when I was going through. Once they're there, they're incredibly difficult to remove, and that's the lesson everybody else has to learn about moving them in the first place.
Yeah, as much as we don't want to throw the people who've already got it to the wolves, you kind of need to use these as examples of why you don't need to establish these populations. Yeah. There are always going to be some difficult answers when it comes to predation. You know, the cormorant one is no doubt going to be spoken about later, and I know there are a couple of questions already. A lot of people just want us to shoot loads of them. There are established populations. They're going to return every year, and to a certain extent, if you shoot them, you'll get them replaced by more cormorants. We need to manage the habitat as much as anything else. And one of the important parts, I think, of Jake's presentation is that you need to mitigate the damage that cormorants cause, or otters, with the habitat improvements. And it always seems a bit, and like I say, coming from a club background myself, it always seems like a sticking plaster on the wound of, if you spend your money on habitat, then the cormorants don't matter. That's not the case at all, but we need to take the necessary steps. Some of them are habitat improvement and environmental improvements. Some of them are evidence gathering. We're never going to increase any license cap. We're never going to get any more action if we don't evidence the problem. And this isn't just circumstantial evidence of anglers saying that cormorants are a problem or otters are a problem. We need to use these reporting services and present real-time data to the authorities, and it will be a long battle with that. There are no simple steps by which these are solved. So we'll move on to the next question. Babs, who's next in line?
We've got Nigel Turner. Are European or Turkish narrow-clawed crayfish also on our non-native invasive species lists?
Yes, it's a simple answer to that one.
Okay.
They're much more restricted in their spread though than signals.
Gotcha. Phil Holt. What can we do about seals, as we're losing a lot of fish on the River Exe in Devon?
I guess that's my one then. Not as many as I've got. Yep. Seals are a really difficult issue that have become more and more prevalent over the last few years, and a lot of this is to do with a lot more. The practice of rehabilitation of seals means that seal colonies are being established more and more on the coast again. Certainly the grey seals, the populations are booming incredibly, but the common seal is not far behind. bit of background on that. I'm currently, my club is on the River Nene that currently has 5 seals in the middle of Peterborough city centre that have moved in from a rehabilitation centre on the east coast, were released into the river and have now been sat in the River Nene for 2 years. They are eating thousands and thousands of pounds of fish, and obviously to the angling public, it's not normal for you know, sea mammals, seals, to be predating on inland freshwater fisheries. But the PR problem there is, from a public perspective, seals eat fish, so it's a very difficult situation. At the moment, there is no established practice to remove seals, but I'm currently working with a couple of groups, the International Veterinary Zoo Group, with support from the Angling Trust, and we've worked with the RSPCA to track these seals and to gain license from Natural England to have them safely removed back to the coast. On that point, if you'd like to get in touch, Phil, it's something we should discuss, because what we're planning to do is essentially set a precedent for removing seals from freshwater environments and taking them safely back to coastal ones. So, Phil, I think we should probably kind of get together after the call and discuss what we can do about that, if that works for you.
Right.
Move on to the next one.
Is Michael Bell. Making a safe haven in a lake with sunken chestnut fence. Do cormorants just go over the fence?
I think Jake can come in this one again, but I've just completed a fisheries improvement project that involved installing a load of chestnut paling, and the simple answer is no. The cormorants will swim towards the fence, the fish will dive inside of it, and the cormorants will just swim around outside of it, because they can't really land or take off from inside that smaller marginal area. They tend to kind of push the fish into the marginal reeds and then stab at them until they die, but they can't essentially land or take off in that marginal area. So no, it's a very protective area. And just to reinforce what Jake said, I've found that chestnut paling is one of the most cost-effective ways to improve your habitat that you could possibly find. It's dirt cheap to get miles and miles of that chestnut paling, and as long as you've got permission and you kind of do it responsibly, is one of the best ways to protect your smaller fish and your silverfish from cormorant predation. I'll let Jake kind of come in on that one as well.
Yeah, no, I've not heard them getting over it. I think there are issues where water levels fluctuate, so you've got to think about your high water and then and then sort of do it from that. But you can get it in, you know, obviously 3, 4, 5, 6 foot sort of height. So yeah, it works a treat. I think you have to be careful if you've got larger carp in there. You've got to be careful not to create a snag on certain areas, or prevent sort of certain fish from reaching sort of spawning areas or wintering areas. But yeah, the fact is you can bend it and mold it and create pretty much what you want.
But again, one of the important parts is there are so many experts out there to speak to. As long as you consult people like Jake or Ian, you will get the right advice as to how much of this you should install and where you should install it. But that one to me is a revelation, because it's so cost effective that even for a very small amount of money, you can protect a lot of habitat with chestnut paling and similar kind of similar things. I've paid for some of the kind of floating island refuges and gabion baskets, and these can come into the thousands and thousands for 1 or 2 little islands that really aren't that cost effective on large waters. This is a much more cost effective solution. And yeah, just to kind of round off the question, no, they don't tend to go over it, but obviously high flood water is an exceptional circumstance. Obviously, if the paling is below the water level, it becomes an issue, but not in the water levels, no. Next question.
We got a Stephen, is it Easterby?
Easterby.
And we also had this via one of your clubmate clients as well. Is any advice on mink, please?
Mink, Jake, anything on mink?
Yeah, I would. So yeah, there's some really good literature out there and best practice about sort of trapping mink. So you can use mink rafts. So there's ones you can pretty much get like a sort of an IKEA flat pack now, which work a treat. What I would say is that to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date traps with otter guards, obviously to prevent otters from accessing those areas. So the first thing would be to do would be to monitor. So you'd put down. So you could either use trail cameras or you'd put out your clay pads to know what you've actually got coming through, and then you could then trap from there. So if you want to, I can send you some information across if you want me to follow up on that one with sort of best practice guidance.
Yeah, we'll save the questions, and obviously we're going to send out a load of resources. But if there's anyone specifically in these questions that we would like to chase up with, we'll get in touch from our side. We don't want you having to wait for any information. So Jake can get in touch with Stephen. Next question.
Yep.
My fishing license allows me to catch fish. Signal crayfish have the word fish in their name. What legislation is in place preventing me from catching signal crayfish? Note, I say catching and not trapping.
Yeah.
That would be environmental.
There isn't any specific legislation about you catching them by rod and line, no.
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 No, there's nothing.
I've caught loads in the river at 2 a.m. So yeah, quite easy to catch.
They're very tasty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You have to catch
the newest one obviously is Chinese mitten crab. Now those you're not allowed to take away. They're specifically prohibited from being removed for the purpose of sale or eating. Are they not, Ian?
Yes, and there is some legislation about the signal crayfish. It sounds counterintuitive to stop people catching signal crayfish for eating, but it was discovered that if you do allow it, people start building their businesses around catching and selling signal crayfish, and then it's in their own best interest to start moving them about.
The same with the mitten crab, which are obviously mitten crab are becoming an ever increasing problem that are probably actually worse than signal crayfish, because I've actually seen underwater footage. Signal crayfish will eat each other and tear each other apart to get to food, whereas mitten crabs will work together to actually get to the food. But mitten crab,
neither of them are a good idea.
No, mitten crab on the local market, especially Chinese restaurants, etc., were selling for £80 a pound. So I could quickly become rich on mitten crabs, as I could run around a lake and pick up 100 last year. Yeah, I believe I know that the Environment Agency have been looking at crayfish and mitten crab for the last 2 or 3 years again specifically. And I would imagine that a license to trap both will, there is a license to trap crayfish at the moment. I think they're all suspended, so that no, they're not actually issuing any trapping licenses at the moment. But again, I think the same for mitten crabs. It's just the legislation takes several years. These things aren't just off the cuff, which is why I say that evidence gathering is so important. You don't just ring up the Environment Agency and say, I fancy catching some crayfish, and they go, yeah, go on then. There's got to be kind of sound evidence behind these things, and it's got to be environmentally responsible. Make sure, mostly it's in the case of deterrence or anything to do with invasive species, it's more about what other species it can affect. This can affect eel populations, migration of fish, anything that you put in the river can affect current populations of the fish we do want and that should be there. So these all need to be considered, and frustrating as that is for angling clubs and fisheries, it's really important that we don't just, it's not about short-term gain, it's about the long-term ecology. Right, moving on. What's the next question, Babs?
So last one on the tech side, and then we'll move to the hands. So Nigel Turner, we've been removing our catfish from our fishery. However, apart from netting and hooking and line, is there any other way of removing the kittens?
Fight nets is the only obvious way of getting rid of the kittens. They're really quite difficult. You saw that picture, that was from a seine netting. I suspect that's a tip of the iceberg. If you're catching them seine netting, there's going to be a lot there. So it requires a concerted effort and the consideration that's going to take a few years. Remove the big ones, the adults, as quickly as you can, and then just keep chipping away at the population.
There's a couple more text questions, Babs, at the bottom now, so just not pinned them yet. But Nigel Turner again. Previously, we decimated our European Turkish narrow-clawed crayfish. They're now starting to return after some 7 years. We found large crayfish, and my hypothesis is that they have migrated back from an adjacent nature reserve. However, to reintroduce the crayfish plague has become virtually impossible given the change in regulations regarding handling red signal crayfish. Have you got any suggestions?
My suggestion would, we don't have a native Turkish narrow-clawed crayfish. We have a native white-clawed crayfish, which is highly susceptible to the signal crayfish plague. We don't want the crayfish plague. That's one of the reasons why signal crayfish drove the white-clawed crayfish to near extinction.
Yeah, again, not much we can do in that regard at the moment. Right. Where can we get practical guidance to remove signal crayfish? Again, we have EA licensed traps, but can only expect a 50% reduction in the population. What other methods can we legally use? Again, same kind of challenging question. There's very little you can do other than licensed trapping. You can catch them by rod and line, or you will catch them by rod and line, and they should be humanely destroyed if you feel capable. But other than that, it is a challenge that there isn't much of a solution to.
No, it's a good example. Again, a good example of why we work so hard to prevent the introduction, because once they're there, they're really difficult to remove. And trapping doesn't work as an eradication method. In fact, it
No,
doesn't
and
really
obviously
work as a
there are
reduction,
obviously
population
theories
reduction.
that trapping and catching larger crayfish allows a boom in the smaller crayfish populations, because the larger ones tend to predate on the smaller ones. So trapping can actually be quite detrimental, because you have a boom in junior ones that aren't being predated by the larger kind of older crayfish.
Yeah.
What is the possibility?
It's a good example of the problems with
don't let it happen in the first place.
And destructive control. It really works like you'd expect it to.
Yeah, this is why it's such an open-ended, and it's not as simple as it seems. Let's just get rid of them all, because it doesn't quite work. And this is where the importance of your check, clean, dry policies, that we're not transporting eggs between venues. Next question here is, what's the possibility of crayfish eggs being transported from one fishery to another via nets? I don't know any numbers behind that, but
small is the answer. It is a theoretical risk, but no more than a theoretical.
Yeah, but the transport of not only invasive species but disease across fisheries due to the usage of nets is obviously quite high on the agenda. Dip tanks are obviously used at quite a lot of fisheries, but not really kind of practical at river fisheries or anything such as that. But you should always dry your equipment in the sunshine. It's probably one of the best methods of making sure you've got a sterile kind of net and mat. And dip tanks actually, in a lot of cases, tend to end up being one of the absolute worst things, because they never get changed. People install a dip tank and think it's going to last forever, and there's probably more disease breeding on those dip tanks than anything that's put in them. So if you do have dip tanks, just make sure you maintain them, because otherwise you're actually probably creating more of a problem. Thanks for listening. Join us next time for another exciting episode of the Casting Forward podcast, brought to you by Clubmate.